At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, in the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name is the VoiceOgre, and let's begin. Falling. The recurring nightmare. A sickening plunge through endless, starless dark. Then, a stop. Movement eased into a sudden, impact-free stop. He lay awake and still on his back, the cold seeping into him. He tried sitting up, but an unseen force held his limbs fast. Smooth, cool bands secured his wrists and ankles to a humming table. The low vibration radiated through his bones, settling at his skull's base. A diffuse overhead light cast a soft, white, contour-flattening glow. His throat constricted. He swallowed the feeling down. Panic, wasted energy. Analyze. Observe. Two figures stood at the light's edge. Tall, thin figures sheathed in polished, bone-white ceramic. Their heads were smooth ovoids, blank except for a single recessed lens in the center. Inside the dark matte lens, intricate inner structure shifted with a slow metabolic rhythm. They moved without sound, their bodies sliding over the floor with an unnerving, fluid economy of motion. A name surfaced from the phantom echoes he mistook for dreams. The Custodians. One slid closer, holding a smooth, dark alloy instrument whose tip radiated at a focused pinprick of heat. It aimed the tool toward his left forearm, resting palm up on the table. The Custodian paused, its lens's internal structures reconfiguring as it examined the scars. A faint constellation of old, silvery, raised lines formed a strangely symmetrical pattern across his pale inner forearm. A doctor once suggested keloid scarring from a forgotten childhood accident. An ex-girlfriend hinted at self-inflicted wounds. Declan knew only they were part of him. An unexplained footnote to his biology. The Custodian's instrument traced the lines. A field of charged particles hovered just above the skin, making the fine hairs on his arm prickle. After analyzing the scars, it moved to a clear patch of skin near his wrist. A tiny, needle-sharp tip extended from the alloy tool and prickled his flesh. A minor sting, then a fresh bead of blood welled up. The Custodian retracted the instrument, looked at his companion, and soft, rapid clicks echoed in the room like stones skittering across a frozen lake. The first one turned and slid toward a bank of faintly shimmering panels outside the main illumination, placing its instrument on a tray. The other remained, observing him with its complex lens. A brief window, an opportunity, a mad, pointless impulse. Declan strained against his right wrist's restraint, feeling for a weak point. The material was smooth and seamless, but pressure revealed a subtle seam near the lock, a tiny imperfection. He focused his energy on that one point, digging his thumbnail into the groove, worrying it back and forth. A sharp sliver of the gray material, enough to cut, fractured off. A few seconds at most. Impulse drove him. The defiance was a small, sharp anchor in the vast emptiness. The act was his. He clenched his fist around the sharp sliver, its edges digging into his palm. He focused, then dragged the sharp point across his forearm, parallel to the oldest, thickest scar. A clean, shocking line of fire seared his forearm. He clamped his jaw, stifling a cry. Blood welled, dark and startling against the white light. He whispered, his voice a ragged rasp. "Let's see if this one stays." The Custodian at the panel turned back, its lens shimmering with rapid micro-adjustments. Its smooth slide quickened into a jerky motion towards him. The world dissolved into a pressure of static, and Declan Holt fell once more. A digital screech, an insistent, hateful pulse designed to drag the dead from slumber, blared from the alarm. Declan slapped his phone silent. 6 a.m. His coffee machine gurgled in the kitchen, a comforting domestic sound. Dark roast and burnt toast lingered from yesterday's breakfast. His life was brutally normal. He swung his legs out of bed,
his skull thrumming with a dull ache. The dream's vividness lingered. The falling, the cold table, the bone-white fingers. He shook his head, running a hand through his messy hair. Too much caffeine and too little sleep. His anxiety about the upcoming deployment must be projecting some half-remembered sci-fi movie into his dreams. He stood, hissing at the sharp sting in his left forearm. He looked down. Parallel to the old silvery scars, a thin, fresh cut sliced across his skin. A straight, deliberate line of dried blood marked his skin, unbelievable in its stark reality. For a moment, his breath hitched, the air refusing to enter his lungs. His apartment's sounds, the refrigerator's hum, the building's distant plumbing groans, the traffic, faded into a flat drone. He stumbled into the bathroom and flickered on the light. A pale face stared back from the mirror, the hollows under his eyes deep as bruises. He held his arm under the harsh fluorescent glare. The cut was real. The dream, then, was real. The falling, the table, the custodians, all of it happened. A choked gasp spiraled from his throat into a laugh. A raw, unhinged bark bounced off the small bathroom's tiled walls. His mind was sound. He was awake, and a specimen, a test subject in an experiment so vast and quiet it wove into his life's fabric. His brutally normal apartment, with its laundry pile and takeout containers, seemed an elaborate theatrical set, and he had just glimpsed the stagehand's moving scenery. He was the butt of a cosmic joke, and also the only one in the audience.
So, a powerful headache, moments of memory loss, and you think you have a concussion from a fall you have no memory of?
Dr. Kenna surveyed him over her glasses, her expression one of professional sympathy as her pen tapped a steady, doubtful rhythm against her tablet.
And this cut on your arm?
I walked into a doorframe. Declan lied. The room was dark, I was disoriented. The key to selling a lie was believing a small part of it. He was disoriented. He went to the urgent care clinic for a particular reason. The headache was a real, dull, persistent ache behind his eyes. The memory loss, that was the point. He needed a pretext, a legitimate medical reason for what he wanted.
Right.
Dr. Kenna said, tapping a note onto her tablet.
Your vitals are normal, pupils responsive. I see signs of a concussion. Mr. Holt, I can prescribe something for the headache and recommend rest.
I'd feel better if we could be sure. Declan pressed, leaning forward. He lowered his voice, and he looked at his hands. Look, my work requires focus, complex problem solving. I've been losing track. I'll stare at a line of code for 10 minutes, and the meaning just drifts away. It's affecting my job. The doctor's expression softened slightly. Lost productivity was a quantifiable symptom.
We could do a CT scan, but that's a lot of radiation for what's likely a minor contusion.
What about an MRI? Declan asked, keeping his tone casual. They're for soft tissue, right? To be safe? She sighed.
MRIs are expensive, and scheduling can be a hassle. I see a slim indication for one.
This was the hard part. He spent 2 days delving into medical imaging procedures. He needed the key phrases. A few times, I've had this tingling on my face's left side, and my right eye's vision went blurry for a second. It's probably a fluke, he added. But my grandmother had a TIA around my age. Dr. Kenna sat up straighter. Her pen's doubtful tapping stopped. Transient ischemic attack. Mini-stroke. Ignoring those symptoms could mean a lawsuit. She tapped rapidly on her tablet.
I see. Well, in that case, we should take precautions. I'll order a full neurological workup. A brain MRI with and without contrast to rule out anything vascular.
He had his referral. He pressed his lips into a thin, neutral line. Thank you, doctor. I appreciate you taking this seriously.
That's my job,
she said, her tone all business. She printed a referral slip and handed it to him. As he took it, a nurse entered to take his blood pressure. A tight ponytail held her hair back, and she had the cuff on his arm and inflated before he could fully register her. As she leaned over, her scrub's collar shifted. For a fraction of a second, a faint symmetrical pattern of silvery scars appeared on the smooth skin above her collarbone. The pattern was smaller than his, more delicate, but its geometry was identical. A perfect mirrored constellation. Declan froze, the referral slip crinkling in his fist. He stared. The nurse finished, oblivious, and straightened up, the collar once again hiding the scars. She gave him a perfunctory smile and left the room. The air left his lungs. He was more than a single anomaly. He was part of a set. The headache, the doctor's skepticism, the constructed lies, all of it receded, unimportant. Others existed. He was part of a strange, silent community. At his desk, Declan Holt wrote algorithms that predicted a 45-year-old man in Ohio would buy artisanal coffee or a fishing magazine subscription based off his search history. He found patterns in human desire's digital noise and translated them into profit. The mind-numbing job paid handsomely. He was getting coffee when he noticed it again. Leland from accounting, a man whose personality consisted of beige slacks and a love for spreadsheets, reached for the sugar. As his shirt's cuff rode up, the faint, unmistakable pattern was etched into Leland's wrist. Declan nearly dropped his mug. Leland offered a bland smile and returned to his desk. Unaware, he was a walking piece of a cosmic puzzle. That night, Declan set aside his work projects. He opened a new terminal on his laptop, the green cursor blinking against the black screen. He built something new. He wrote scrapers, crawlers, data aggregators, digital bloodhounds to sniff out the anomalies embedded in the world's structure. He downloaded 20 years of local news reports, social media posts from his city, geological surveys, and atmospheric weather data. He searched for keywords: power outages, electromagnetic interference, strange lights, localized tremors. He built a program to find correlations for officially unexplained events clustered in time and location. The initial results were a chaotic mess of conspiracy theories and mundane events. Then he found it. A forum tucked away in an unindexed internet corner, its design frozen since 1998. The title was blunt: Red Rock Alien Abductee Support Group. He scoffed. This was the fringe's fringe, the realm of paranoid theories and blurry photos of weather balloons. He moved to close the tab when a particular thread caught his eye: the marks we share. He clicked. Post after post described the same thing: unexplained symmetrical scars on their necks, ribs, and ankles. Doctors dismissed them. Family mocked them, and they lived with a nagging sense of missing time in a slightly unreal world. They shared stories of dreams, of falling, of cold tables, and silent figures. The pinned announcement sat at the page's bottom. Weekly meeting, Wednesdays, 8 p.m. The Junction Cafe, back room. The reached are welcome. The word resonated. Reached. It sounded more like an invitation than a kidnapping. A hand extended from the void. He had to go. The idea was insane, pathetic, but it was his only lead. The data pointed here, and Declan Holt always followed the data. The Junction Cafe embodied fluorescent-lit mediocrity. Stale coffee and grease thickened the air. Strips of silver sealant tape held together the cracked, peeling vinyl on the booth seats. Declan pushed open the backroom's door. The space was dingier than the main diner, with faded local band posters on the walls and a single flickering overhead light. A few people sat at intervals around a long formica table. A large man with a magnificent gray beard and a trucker hat looked up.
"Looks like you got a new one,"
he boomed.
"Grab a seat. The brownies are on Nana Joe. They're magic."
He gestured with a fork toward a plate of disconcertingly dark brownies on the table's center. An old woman with a laugh-lined face gave him a warm smile.
"Welcome, dear.
I'm Joe.
Declan sat at the table's end, feeling like an undercover cop at a sci-fi convention. He introduced himself in a low voice. Besides the big trucker, Hoyt, and Nana Joe, a man with military posture just nodded and said his name was Kane. A few others sat around, all with the same wary, haunted look. He kept to himself and listened. He expected wild, unhinged ravings. Instead, grounded people spoke, making sense of the unbelievable. They spoke of their experiences with resigned gallows humor. Hoyt joked the aliens accidentally cured his gout during one checkup. A mechanic named Maria talked about losing 3 hours on a drive from Flagstaff and finding her toolbox rearranged in perfect alphabetical order. Kane spoke of his time in the Air Force. Radar signatures appearing and vanishing in an instant. Events logged as atmospheric clutter that everyone on duty knew was something else. As he listened, Declan kept his observations discreet. Nana Joe touched on a spot on her neck where a familiar pattern of scars peeked from her collar. Kane reached for a glass of water, revealing the scars on his forearm. When Maria crossed her legs, he noticed the same mark on her ankle. Everyone in the room had them. Every single one. He exhaled a breath he'd been holding. His whole life he'd been an observer, a man watching the world through glass. Here in this grimy back room with a trucker, a retired teacher, a mechanic, and a handful of other misfits, it was inside. He found his people. The same brand scarred them all, making them part of the same unseen herd. And for the first time, the feeling became the beginning instead of a curse. The meeting broke up. Hoyt argued with Maria about bypassing a car's electronic ignition system. A conversation that sounded suspiciously like a planned heist. Nana Joe collected empty mugs, her movements calm and deliberate. Declan was about to slip out when someone spoke, their voice cutting through the low chatter. "You're new." He turned. A young woman stood there, fidgeting with her messenger bag's strap. Her dark eyes darted around the room, taking in everything at once, and she vibrated with a kinetic, caffeinated energy. She looked out of place, a physicist at a poetry slam. "Declan," he said. "Sloane Finch," she replied in a rapid burst. "I'm a grad student, astrophysics at ASU." She took a deep breath. "Okay, look, I came here to debunk you all. I assume you were confirmation-based individuals misinterpreting your mundane phenomena, a fun little sociological study." Declan quirked a brow. "And?" She worried her lower lip, pulling a tablet from her bag. "And then you all talked and compared dates." She swiped the screen and turned it toward him. Complex charts, graphs, and the city's atmospheric pressure maps covered the screen. "For the last 18 months, she said, her voice dropping, "I've tracked a series of localized atmospheric plasma events all over the city. They're brief, intense, and they leave a residual electromagnetic signature defying established models for meteorology or geology. My professor thinks that the sensor array is flawed, and I think that he's wrong." She pointed to several red dots glowing on the map. "These are the events. Tonight, I cross-referenced your missing time dates with my data." She tapped the screen. "They match perfectly. Every single one." Declan stared at the screen. The red dots formed a clear pattern. A signal in the static, an echo in the machine. "You have empirical data," he whispered. "I have findings that defy explanation," she corrected, her voice tight. "I came here looking for cranks, and instead I found a correlation that would destroy my career if I published it." A grin touched Declan's face. The first genuine one in a long time. "My entire job is finding patterns in chaotic information sets," he said. "Your numbers and my experiences, you and me, we'll figure this out." Sloane looked from him to the confounding evidence on her screen and back. "This is insane," she whispered. "That's what we do here, I guess," Declan said. The MRI machine was a pristine white tube in a cold, dark room. A tired technician ran through the startup checklist with the enthusiasm of a deep fryer operator.
Allergic to anything?
No.
Any metal in your body? Pacemakers, pins, shrapnel?
Just a cynical worldview, but it's safe for the magnets. Declan muttered. The technician's expression stayed flat.
All right, lie back.
She prepped the IV line.
This is the gadolinium-based contrast agent. You'll feel a cold sensation as it enters your bloodstream, which is normal. It'll give us a clearer picture.
She slid the needle smoothly into his arm. The cold liquid moved through his veins, a foreign chill spreading up his arm and into his chest, an alien invasive presence in his body's warm biological machine.
Okay,
She said, her voice already distant.
we're sliding you in now. The machine's loud, so we have headphones with music, or you can use earplugs. Hold as still as possible.
He chose the earplugs. The platform slid backward, carrying him into the narrow, claustrophobic tube. The world shrank to a white cylinder inches from his face. Then deafening clanks, whirs, and percussive bangs erupted, as if it were trapped inside a drum during a heavy metal concert. He closed his eyes, his thoughts straying from the test results. He was sure the doctor would find normal results. His headache was already fading, the last phantom echo from the custodian's metal tinkering. He hoped for a clean scan. He focused on the cold, foreign substance circulating through every capillary in his brain. The gadolinium, an unexpected variable. A counteragent introduced to a system he was just beginning to understand. He lay in the roaring dark, a human experiment about to run an experiment of his own. The report came back 2 days later. The official report, delivered via a sterile online patient portal, read, "Mild concussion, now fully resolved. Findings consistent with a healthy intracranial structure. Normal." Everything was normal. He slumped, his shoulders rounding. Disappointment soured in his mouth. And then he remembered. The real result floated in his blood. Astrophysics textbooks, empty coffee mugs, and whiteboards covered in headache-inducing equations buried Sloane's apartment. In the center of it all, her laptop glowed, the hub of their joint investigation.
Okay, I've integrated the raw atmospheric data,
Sloane said, moving swiftly between the keyboard and a secondary numeric pad as she inputted commands.
Now let's feed it your pattern recognition script.
Declan leaned over her shoulder, inhaling the scent of coffee and dry erase markers. Oh, the script now looks beyond single events. I modified it to search for temporal and spatial patterns, a rhythm, a schedule. If these guys are scientists, they must follow one.
Let's hope so.
Sloane muttered, hitting the enter key. The program ran. Lines of code streamed down the screen. The screen held still for a minute. Then a three-dimensional wireframe map of the city materialized on the monitor. Red Rock's skeletal ghost. Pulses of light bloomed on the map, corresponding to the dates and locations of Sloane's plasma events. Now for the cross-reference, Declan said, his voice tense. He uploaded a file, a list of every reached member's home address, collected under the guise of a phone tree. The program ingested the new data. Small blue dots appeared on the map, marking the addresses. Red energy pulses bloomed directly over the blue dots. Someone had targeted them. The events localized and deliberate.
They focus on individuals,
Sloane whispered, her expression odd.
They're targeting us.
More, Declan said, pointing to the timeline at the screen's bottom. Look at the frequency. A cycle exists. Every 29 days, on schedule. His stomach tightened. Run the prediction. Sloane typed in a final command. The algorithm churned for a second. Then, a new red pulse materialized on the map, this one blinking at a steady rate. It pulsed over a familiar intersection in a quiet residential neighborhood. His own apartment building. At the screen's bottom, a line of text appeared in stark white letters. Probability of next event, high. Estimated time window, 48 hours. The mystery became a countdown. The echo in the machine was coming for him, and this time, he would be ready. Chatter in the Junction Cafe's back room grew louder, faster. Declan and Sloane stood at the long table's head, their laptop projecting the blinking prophetic map onto the grimy, water-stained wall. When they finished their presentation, a heavy silence settled over the room. Only the ancient refrigerator's hum broke the stillness. Then, Hoyt, the trucker, slammed his heavy hand on the table, making the coffee cups jump.
Hot damn!
He roared, a wide grin splitting his beard.
I knew it! I told you guys were onto something. And there is a pattern.
Sloane gripped her tablet's edge and steadily answered Maria's barrage of questions about EM shielding. Nana Jo sipped her tea, her expression calm, nodding as if they had confirmed something she already knew. Kane, the ex-Air Force vet, stood with crossed arms, his posture rigid. He fixed his gaze on the blinking red dot in the map. After the main group had broken into excited, nervous chitter, he pulled Declan aside. "You're walking into a situation beyond your understanding," he hissed.
I have a good idea,
Declan countered.
"We're finding evidence."
"You're making yourself a target,"
Kane shot back.
"and all of us. Organizing like this, creating patterns for them to see. It draws their attention. Do you think that we're the first group of scarred-up people to meet in a diner and piece it together?"
Declan frowned.
What are you talking about?
"Stories, rumors, things you hear and dismiss,"
Kane said, and he darted a look toward the door.
"The last time a group organized like this, as back in the 90s, people had accidents. A gas leak, a faulty brake line, a sudden unexplained aneurysm. They vanished."
Declan stared at him. Paranoia, or a phantom memory, an echo of a previous cycle that bled through the wipe.
We have proof? That makes this different,
Declan said, though the words sounded hollow.
"Proof is just a name for a visible target," Kane retorted, turning to leave. "You're prodding something dangerous, Holt. Be ready when it prods back."
He walked out, leaving Declan standing mid-room. The group looked to him, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. He wanted answers, and in the process, he had made himself the leader of a support group for the alien abductees on the verge of confronting their captors. His life's capacity for weirdness seemed bottomless. After the meeting, as Declan packed up the laptop, Nana Jo touched his arm.
"Walk with me, dear,"
she said, her tone a gentle command. They stepped out into the cool desert night. The Junction Cafe's neon sign cast a tired, buzzing glow over the empty parking lot. Jo was silent for a long time, and Declan found his own breathing slowing to match hers.
"Kane is scared," she murmured. "He has a good reason. Fear is a sensible response to the vast and hungry dark."
He thinks that we're inviting trouble,
Declan replied.
"We are,"
she agreed with a serene nod.
"Trouble is the price of an answer. It always has been."
She stopped walking and met his gaze.
"I want to tell you about my husband, Arthur."
Declan waited.
"He was an amateur astronomer,"
she began, a fond smile on her lips.
"He spent every clear night in the backyard with his telescope charting the heavens. He called them his silent friends. He used to have dreams like yours, Declan. Dreams of falling. He always said he was looking for something he'd lost up there. A star missing from his charts."
She reached into her purse and pulled out a faded, creased photograph. She handed it to him. It showed a young man with a proud grin, standing beside a large homemade telescope. He had a wide smile and a shock of dark hair. On his arm, clearly visible in the old print, was the scar, the same confounding symmetrical pattern. Declan's breathing stopped.
"He was one of us,"
Nana Jo murmured.
"The first I ever met. He spent his whole life searching for proof, for a signal in the static. His search met only silence. The technology existed in a different form then, but he persisted. She looked from the photograph back to Declan, her gaze clear and steady. Some people are too stubborn to forget. Their questions are too loud. Arthur was one, and I think you are too.
She offered a legacy, a history of defiance that stretched back decades. Declan looked down at the smiling man in the photograph, a fellow traveler he was fated to meet only in a photograph, and then up at the vast, silent sky dusted with stars. He had to know. For Arthur. For all of them. The predicted night arrived heavy and still. A strange quiet fell over the city. The usual hum of traffic and life muted and distant. Declan sat in his dark living room, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the table beside him. His dog, a scruffy terrier mix named Buster, whined and paced from the door to the window, his animal senses picking up something beyond Declan's perception. He sent Sloane home. Putting 2 targets at the event center was an unnecessary risk. He had his laptop open, running a diagnostic program that monitored the local EM spectrum. For hours, the readings were flat. Normal background radiation. Then, at 2:13 a.m., they changed. The line on the graph spiked, a sharp peak of interference across all frequencies. The lights in his apartment flickered once, twice, then held steady. A low-frequency hum vibrated up through the floorboards, a feeling deep in his teeth and in his chest's hollow. More than a sound he could hear. Buster stopped pacing and let out a low growl, the fur on his back standing up. The air in the room grew cold, carrying a strange chemical taste at his throat's back, the flavor of a live current. Declan looked at his laptop. The screen glitched, the display distorting as if seen through a heat haze. The algorithm was right. He walked to the window and looked out at the silent, sleeping city. A grid of orange and white lights under a moonless sky. His breathing was slow and even. The anxiety churning in his gut for weeks yielded to a cold resolve. He, a scientist, was about to prove his own hypothesis. Wild and terrifying. He prepared for the ground. He'd baited the trap with himself. The hum intensified, the windows rattling in their frames. The whiskey in his glass trembled, concentric rings spreading across its amber surface. He raised the glass in a silent toast to the empty sky. The world went white. He lay on the table, the white light, the cold air, the smooth restraints. It all felt horribly, exquisitely familiar. But something was different. Clarity cut through the usual fog. He remembered his apartment. He remembered the hum, the whining dog, the whiskey. He recalled the gadolinium. His memory was intact. The abduction continued, and he was wide awake at the wheel. A custodian slid toward him, holding a diagnostic tool, its alloy surface gleaming in the stark light, and reached for his arm, ready to begin the same procedure as before. Before it could touch him, Declan sat up. The motion was so unexpected, so contrary to the established order that the custodians froze. Their silent sliding motion shattered. One, observing from the side, took a half-step back, a microscopic, revealing hesitation. They were machines facing a ghost. Declan swung his legs over the table's side, the restraints falling away as if they were unlocked. He ran a hand over his face, a raw, manic grin forming. He looked at the 2 stunned, silent figures.
So,
He said, his voice raspy but clear.
we doing this again, or you at least gonna buy me dinner first?
The lead custodian, the one he called the curator, recovered first. Sharp, commanding clicks echoed in the room. The other custodian, the one that had hesitated, moved to flank him. They advanced with a restored, fluid purpose. Their posture that of guards, corralling an unpredictable animal. They brought over a larger device, a smooth white helmet that mattified the light around it. It hummed with contained energy, and a primal, instinctual certainty rose in Declan's throat. This was the primary tool, the memory-wiping machine. His moment of bravado vanished, replaced by a surge of raw adrenaline. As the technician approached with the helmet, Declan lunged, shoving the custodian with all his weight. It was like pushing against a marble statue. The creature slid back a mere inch, its internal mechanics adjusting for the impact without a sound. He scrambled to the other side of the table, but the second custodian was already there. Declan kicked out, his heel glancing harmlessly off a ceramic shin. His resistance was a frantic human thing, grunting, desperate, against their silent, machine-like efficiency. Two sets of hands gripped his arms. The pressure was absolute, not the grip of muscle and bone, but the cold, unyielding force of a hydraulic press. They forced him back down onto the table, his struggles becoming useless twitches against their immense, placid strength. He thrashed his head from side to side, trying to evade the descending device. A third, unnervingly steady hand clamped onto his forehead, holding his skull fast. He clamped his jaw, a last, silent act of defiance. The helmet settled over his scalp. The humming intensified, a low thrum vibrating through his skull. The pitch rose, climbing higher into an ultrasonic whine. Then, just as it reached an unbearable crescendo, it sputtered. The whine died with a low, pathetic groan, like a dying appliance. A single red light blinked on its surface. Error. The curator emitted sharp, interrogative clicks at its subordinate, who immediately produced a scanner, and the technician ran it over Declan's head. On a nearby floating display, a translucent, three-dimensional mesh of Declan's brain appeared. The brain's pathways glowed with a soft blue light. But something was wrong. As the technician zoomed in on the hippocampus, the seat of memory, the image flickered and distorted. Thousands of bright green particles flared like static, clustered around the key protein chains their technology targeted. The gadolinium. It had bonded to the proteins, creating a chemical shield, a biological countermeasure. The curator's complex lens fixed on Declan. It emitted slower, measured clicks now. They escorted him from the lab. 4 custodians slid around him in a diamond pattern. The corridor walls curved seamlessly into floors and ceilings in a disorienting expanse. The architecture felt organic, yet sterile, a place where they had studied life, but only from a distance. They entered a vast circular chamber, colder and quieter than the corridor. In the chamber's center, a raised circular platform stood, occupied by several custodians. They were still as statues, observers at a tribunal. The curator stood at the platform's center. Beside him, slightly behind, was the younger technician who performed the scan. Her gaze held an intensity closer to fascination than cold analysis. They positioned Declan on the chamber's central point, a specimen under a microscope. He was a microbe awaiting a lecture on its own insignificance. The curator addressed him, its voice, clear English, projected from an unseen translator. The sound was flat and uninflected, a machine reading a textbook. "You are an anomaly," the translator stated. "A persistent error in the data stream. We recorded your deviation. Now you will explain your malfunction." The curator gestured, and a holographic projection of Declan's body materialized beside him. The image rotated, highlighting the scar constellations on his forearm and ribs in glowing red. "Explain the purpose of self-mutilation," the translator stated. The question was not an inquiry. It was a demand for a variable to complete an equation. Declan's breath hitched. He had their attention. This was the moment. He looked from the hologram to the unblinking lens of the curator. "They're not mutilations," he said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "They're messages. Proof. They're proof that a part of us remembers, even when you make us forget." The curator processed this for a moment. A low hum came from the other custodians on the platform, a sound of serene, logical dismissal. "Your interpretation is incorrect," the translator returned flatly. "We have observed these marks on previous iterations. They are maladaptive persistence artifacts, unscheduled data retention from routine maintenance. You mark yourselves like livestock, a record of procedure beyond your recall. It is pitiable.
Previous iterations?
Declan seized on the phrase.
You've done this before. To who?
To your species, the curator stated, as if explaining a basic principle of physics. We have performed this corrective action 38 times. A cold dread, vast and historical, settled over Declan.
Corrective action? You abduct people, wipe their minds, and you call it corrective action?
Your terminology is emotional and therefore imprecise, the curator replied. The holographic projection shifted, displaying not Declan, but Earth. Images flickered past. Wars fought with incomprehensible energies. Cities of confounding design crumbling to dust. Civilizations rising and falling like the tide. Every time your civilization reaches the threshold of interstellar expansion, you fracture. You turn your tools of time. Your civilization reaches the threshold of interstellar expansion, you fracture. You turn your tools of discovery into weapons. You poison your cradle. Your curiosity always outpaces your wisdom. They weren't invaders. They were zookeepers. Gardeners.
So you just what? You hit a reset switch?
Declan asked, his voice a raw whisper. Destruction is illogical, a waste of a promising, if flawed, biological specimen. The curator explained. We prune your knowledge branches that lead to self-destruction. A targeted species-wide memory suppression. A technological rollback. It restores you to a state of relative innocence. It is an act of mercy. The curator's featureless face turned toward Declan. Your defining trait is your most tragic flaw. It is an incurable itch to know that which will destroy you. Declan looked down at his scarred arm, then back at the cold, logical God King on the platform. He laughed, a short, sharp, and utterly human sound that was an anomaly all its own to the sterile chamber.
You call them mistakes,
he said, his voice ringing with a newfound strength. He held up his arm, displaying his scars for the entire conclave to see.
You name them artifacts. Every single one of these marks is a memory that you tried and you failed to take. They mean that I survived you. They mean that I remembered you.
He stepped forward. The guards tensed, but the curator held up a hand, allowing it, observing the anomaly's behavior.
You talk about our curiosity as if it is a disease,
Declan said, his voice rising.
You're damn right it is. We're the species that lands on other worlds because we have to know what's over the other hill. We're the species that splits the atom knowing that it could burn the world down because of the question of what's inside. That's too vital to ignore. We burn our own hands reaching for the light. You label that a flaw, and we call it the price of wonder.
He swept his gaze across the white figures.
Yeah, we fail. We destroy ourselves. We're a walking, talking, screaming paradox of brilliance and stupidity. But we always build it back together. And we build it a little different each time, a little better. And see, that's the part that eludes your logic. Do you ever think that maybe the point is the struggle itself? You overgrown calculators. The climb. The goddamn itch.
The chamber was quiet. The custodians stood motionless, their dark lenses fixed on him. He had presented them with an illogical proposition, that the purpose of the experiment was the error itself. But the younger custodian, the technician, tilted her head, a minuscule gesture, a deviation of less than a degree. But in their world of perfect economy, it was a seismic event. She took a half step forward, her gaze fixed on Declan. An inquiry in a species that valued answers above all. The curator noticed it. It emitted a sharp, clipped click, a command for her to stay still. It turned its gaze back to Declan, the moment of academic diagnosis over. The anomaly persists, the translator declared. We will sterilize the experiment. He lay on the table again. This time, any pretense of a medical procedure vanished A smooth gray material flowed over his wrists and ankles before hardening into clamps fused to the table itself. The custodians prepared a different device. A direct contact instrument with a trio of sharp, humming probes. A brute force wipe. It would bypass the gadolinium, but the curator's earlier words echoed in his mind. The process would be crude. It would cause damage. It would leave him less. He had seconds. He fought against the restraints, his muscles straining. They held fast. Only his body was his weapon. He twisted his head to the side, forcing his left hand as close as it could. He bit down on his own thumb, hard. White, hot agony lanced through his thumb, but he persisted. He used his bloody, torn thumbnail to scratch a message into the other hand's palm. A missive written in his own substance. The device descended, the hum growing louder. He looked past it, and he locked eyes with the technician. She stood by the control panel, watching him, her lens held steady. She witnessed his final, mad act of self-mutilation for a message. She witnessed data carving data into itself. She stood silent and still. She looked away only after the probes made contact. The probes touched his skull. White. Silence. The alarm screeched. 6 a.m. Declan slapped his phone silent. His coffee machine gurgled in the kitchen. He sat up, a heavy pulse starting inside his skull. A powerful, disorienting wave of déjà vu washed over him. The ghost of a dream about falling already dissolving in the morning light. Hollow. A formatted drive. His left palm itched, a fierce, burning sensation. He looked down. The skin was raw, red, and angry. Words scarred his flesh, the lines already scabbing with dried blood. He brought his hand closer, his heart hammering out a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm. He could just make them out. 3 simple words. A message from a stranger about a blank life. Keep looking up. He stared at the message from himself for a long, silent moment. Its meaning was a complete mystery. A question without context. An answer without a problem. But as he looked at the crude, desperate letters, he recognized them as a compass, a directive, a reason. He got out of bed and walked to the window. He looked out at the morning sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue. And for the first time that day, Declan Holt smiled, a slow, genuine expression of unadulterated wonder. High in the silent dark of orbit, the curator and the technician watched the turning sphere of Earth on a vast projection, showing the planet's atmospheric shimmer and orbital traffic. A tiny, man-made satellite glinted as if it caught the sun, a speck of metal and ambition. The curator noted the subject's successful memory reset. They had corrected the anomaly. The data stream was clean. It is a pattern, it stated, flat and final. We corrected the anomaly. We have restored order. But they are a persistent species. The technician continued to watch the glimmering satellite, her lens fixed on the stubborn, illogical little light. When she spoke, her translated voice was a near whisper, a fragile deviation from her kind's perfect monotone. Perhaps, curator, that is the point. The curator turned its featureless face to look at its apprentice. For the first time in its long existence, it remained silent.